And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Thursday. Welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And of course, today's show is going to be starting off with a rough moment right there, but it is Thursday, so we can say hello to the Fox. It looks like we've got some people in the chat. We have Cat Daddy Steve here. Hello, Cat Daddy Steve. How's it going? Charlie is here. Charlie Don't Surf. Welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. Batman66 is here. Says, Viva El Nedo. Muchas gracias, Batman. And DNA King is here saying howdy. Well, hello. How's everybody doing? On Tuesdays and Thursdays this summer, I'm going live at 10:30 a.m. to do True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. You can put whatever ideas you want in the comments section in the live chat. And I wanted to use these episodes as ones that would focus on stories that are related to criminology, forensics, and criminal psychology. And on the previous episodes of True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, I've talked a lot about criminology and a lot about psychology, but I haven't delved into the world of forensics too much. So that was something that I was hoping to do for this episode here. And once again, you can ask any question you want in the live chat, and I'll try my best to respond to it. But last year on the channel, I was working with the Zodiac Monday segment, and at the end of every episode, I would do a small side story that would come from the book Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, written by Cloyd Steiger. And it's the memoir of a homicide detective from the Seattle-Tacoma area. And that's what I would like to cover in this episode here, because again, this is how people are investigating. I learned about Cloyd Steiger's books because of the Citizen Detective podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks. And I've been talking a lot about them on Black Box Online Radio because I've been going through their material on Zodiac Monday. I was mentioning that I went through their series on Bible John, and I just went through their episodes on the Burger Chef murders. But at the end of that episode, they just started talking about their recent attempted assassination of Donald Trump and the shooter, William Crooks. William Thomas Crooks is his name, right? And Robert is here. He says, good morning, Ned. Good to see you. Good to see you too, Robert. Welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. So some of the stories from Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape that I didn't get to discuss on last year's Zodiac Mondays relate to a serial killer investigation that Cloyd Steiger was a part of. And they began investigating a serial killer named Dwayne Lee Harris, who was known as the Seattle Jungle Killer. The jungle is a part of Seattle that is a wooded area that is frequented by people who are using drugs and participating in drug-related crimes. So it becomes a hotbed for criminal activity. And a bizarre thing happened. A woman was murdered, and she was tied up with her shoelaces, like bound and even gagged, but she was tied with her shoelaces. And then as a little bit of time went by, and another crime took place where it appeared that somebody had attempted to tie someone up with their shoelaces, but they were unsuccessful at doing that. And then more time went by, and a third victim was found tied up with her shoelaces. And that was very obvious at this point that there was a serial killer on the loose. And ultimately, they did catch the guy, and it turned out that he was a man named Dwayne Lee Harris, and he has two serial killer nicknames. One of them is the Seattle Jungle Killer, as I said for the previously mentioned reason, and the other one is the Seattle Shoelace Slasher. And this gets to the point where even somebody like me, who regularly talks about serial killer nicknames here on Black Box Online Radio, is forced to admit that now you're just being silly, calling a serial killer the Seattle Shoelace Slasher. I mean, just gonna tie somebody up or something with a shoelace and slash them. It's almost just making a mockery of the situation at that point. And Richard Mills is here. He says, hello, great to catch it live. Great to have you here, Richard. So with the story of the Seattle Shoelace Slasher, we have a question here from Charlie who says, have you heard of Profiling with Pat Brown, her YouTube channel? And the answer is yes. And I used Pat Brown's YouTube channel as the source material for an episode that I did about Jack the Ripper, because she has a lot to say about Jack the Ripper, and she has her own Jack the Ripper suspect, Jacob Levy. And I'll come back to him. But the reason why I wanted to respond to Charlie's question right now is because Pat Brown also wrote the book Killing for Sport, which I talked about on a previous episode of True Crime Talk Radio. And this story of the Seattle Jungle Killer sounded like it was pulled right out of the pages of Pat Brown's book, Killing for Sport. Because in that book, she talks about how serial killers can function. First, they can start out by committing a crime that wasn't necessarily a planned murder. They commit the murder, maybe a different situation got out of control, and the victim was murdered. The second crime was done to recreate the first crime, testing the waters. It's just a test for the person himself or herself to see if they can do this again for a second time without getting caught. And then by the third time, the killer has established a pattern. Maybe they've established an identity. Bear in mind that the Zodiac killer didn't write his name on anything until after the second murder, didn't even make phone calls or write any letters until after the second murder. By the third crime, they've established an identity. I think the Zodiac killer is a textbook example of this, but so is the Seattle shoelace slasher, the Seattle jungle killer, because with the first crime, he murdered a woman, and it was because she had stolen something from him. She had stolen drugs from him. Let's just get to the point there. And they even talked about this on the Citizen Detective podcast in relation to a different story. And that was just about how a lot of people have this in mind that people get murdered over drug debts. And they do. People can get murdered over drug debts. But what is much more common is that somebody will be murdered over the theft of something from a drug dealer. Because if someone owes a drug debt, the drug dealer can still do certain things to try and reclaim the money. However, if somebody has stolen something from a drug dealer, it's retribution. And one of the things that Dwayne Lee Harris actually said after he was captured was the victim was begging and pleading, "Don't do this, I have kids." And he didn't care. It almost fueled his excitement in a way, even though he didn't say those specific words. But something about that really almost excited him, hearing the stuff about how the victim was going to be missed by her families. And this is discussed countless times in books about serial killers, the whole concept of knowing that somebody is going to be missed by family members makes it even more enjoyable for the serial killer, as disgusting as that sound. So the first murder that he committed was truly connected to a theft. It was a revenge killing because she had stolen something from him. That's the crime that's committed without necessarily a strong premeditation, or that he didn't wake up that morning expecting to murder someone. Then the second crime is done to see if he can recreate the first one, and that was botched more or less. He wasn't even able to pull the victim's shoelace off her own shoes. He was actually using the victim's shoelaces to tie them up. That didn't work out. But the third one, he was able to get her shoelaces off, and that was where he gets the name the Seattle shoelace slasher, because in that instance, the victim pulled out a knife and tried to defend herself, and he was able to take the knife from her, and that's how she was slashed. So this is a clear example of somebody using the formula from Pat Brown's Killing for Sport just almost to a T. But the Seattle shoelace slasher, Dwayne Lee Harris, was ultimately caught because of his own admission. He was in jail for something else, and he decided to come forward as a jailhouse informant. And we all know that jailhouse informants are not very reliable. But in this instance, he said that he was aware of what had happened. He knew who the killer was, and it was an individual named Mike Smith. And firstly, have you ever known anybody named Mike Smith? I've known somebody named Mike Smith, right? An extremely common name from the English language. And people just began to think, he's probably just messing around. This guy's name couldn't really be Mike Smith, right? When he said he witnessed one of the murders, he knew who the killer was, and it was Mike Smith. And he's providing this information because he's in jail and maybe he's trying to cut a deal or something. But ultimately, that was his downfall, and they realized that this guy was the killer. And also, they had picked up another woman who was actually only 16 years old. You could even call her a girl, and she was arrested for soliciting prostitution. And she said that a similar thing happened. A man had tried to tie her up with a shoelace, and he had tried to kill her, but she was able to get away. And some people use their legal names on the street, and other people use their made-up aliases. You have your government name and your street name, right? Not like I know anything about this firsthand, but Dwayne Lee Harris was using the name Chilly Willie. That was his nickname. That was how people referred to him as. And the person whom was arrested, the 16-year-old girl, even knew him to the point where she knew him by his street name, Chilly Willie, and they knew about that because he was already in jail, and they had conversations with this guy because he said that he knew who the real killer was. All of these pieces came together. This girl was arrested saying that, yeah, this guy tried to attack me and tie me up with a shoelace. That meant You had a mountain of evidence, and ultimately, Dwayne Lee Harris, the Seattle Jungle Killer, was sentenced to 94 years in jail. But as far as Charlie asking about Pat Brown's channel, profiling with Pat Brown, then I would just like to point out that she has a Jack the Ripper suspect named Jacob Levy. And at first, I'm a little bit skeptical, always learning about new suspects in the Ripper case. But ultimately, I ended up moving Jacob Levy into my top four suspects for some of the following reasons. He was a butcher in the area, he had syphilis, and it could have affected his mind to the point where he began like even hearing voices, or he was just not in a strong state of mind. But yes, I've talked about that in some of the previous episodes. I also have a standalone episode called Jack the Ripper, Suspect Jacob Levy, if people would like to hear more. Jeff Jones is here. Hello, Jeff Jones. How's it going? Welcome to True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. Now, a lot of you guys follow unsolved mysteries here on this channel. The Zodiac Killer, Jack the Ripper, D.B. Cooper. And as I said, Cloyd Steiger is one of the regular panelists on the Citizen Detective podcast. And one thing they were discussing in a recent episode was that a writer is only as good as his sources or her sources. But this should also be relevant to the people who are writing newspaper articles, to the people who are writing police reports. Because as a former homicide detective, Cloyd Steiger pointed out that he would be investigating cases and then he would read about them in the paper. And one time he read a news article that just didn't have anything right. He was talking about completely different things. Like every single sentence had something about it that was incorrect. And another follow-up that came from another participant of the show, Dr. Lee Meller, one of the co-hosts, is sometimes even the police reports can have errors in them. And I experienced this not exactly firsthand, but you can also get experiences where people have creative liberties when they are creating the police reports. And in the Zodiac Killer mystery, it was when I was reading the transcript of the Lake Berryessa stabbing, where the Zodiac Killer put on his hooded costume and approached Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard, held them up at gunpoint, and he's having this conversation with Brian Hartnell. And Brian Hartnell tried his best to recreate this in a transcript. And when you read the thing online, there are so many things in there that we aren't 100% sure if the Zodiac Killer said them. There's even a gap in the conversation. Brian Hartnell simply couldn't remember what had happened. And Lacey is here. Hello, Lacey. William Kane is here, late again. Hey, he's just getting started, only 12 minutes in, William Kane. And Richard Mills says hi to everyone. Hi back to you, Richard Mills. But with the Lake Berryessa transcript, Brian Hartnell is saying things he's quoted in the transcript saying that he met this guy, he's talking to him. The Zodiac says, I'm an escaped convict from Deer Lodge Prison. And then Brian says, what's the name of the prison again? Deer Lodge. Quoted multiple times saying the words Deer Lodge. But in all reality, Brian Hartnell wasn't 100% sure that he heard the words Deer Lodge. And in the police reports, there is something that is contradictory to that, where he says it might have been that there were two words in the name. He uses the expression double name, meaning that there were two words that were used. It could have been something that just had two words. Bear in mind that the Zodiac Killer would have been talking from behind a mask. So Brian Hartnell even said he may have said Fern Feathers or Fern Lock, something with lock in the name. And then one of the other people who's responding to him says, now, the first time I thought you said it was the word lodge. And could it have been Deer Lodge? There's a prison in Montana called Deer Lodge Prison. Yeah, that could have been it. So this becomes the foundation of countless theories in the Zodiac Killer mystery that are connected to Deer Lodge, Montana. That's just an example of how there can be creative liberties that are put into certain police documents, because that's the transcript of the Zodiac Killer's Lake Berryessa stabbing. But to come back to some of these issues that we've been discussing on in the book Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, I began to notice very early on while I was reading this book that not every story is like Jack the Ripper. Not every story is like the Zodiac Killer or D.B. Cooper, where you have this figure who just escapes some way, somehow, where just all of these elements were either perfectly in balance for this Joe Schmo to escape without getting caught, or this person was extremely smart and knew how to deceive everyone. If you read the book Homicide: The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, you will find that most criminals aren't that good at getting away with stuff. Look at what I just said about the Seattle Jungle Killer. He is somebody who thought that he was slick. He thought he was able to talk his way out of the situation, or that he could be a jailhouse informant and provide information that only the real killer would know. The guy's name was actually Mike Smith. It sounds really dumb when you say it out loud right now, but everybody is an armchair detective when they sit back and they watch forensic files and they're like, what's going on with this person? How could they be so stupid? How could they be leaving fibers behind at a crime scene? Well, this guy inserted himself into the mix and ultimately gave it all away. But that's what seems to happen, more or less. And those are the stories that are in the book Homicide: The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, where somebody would commit a murder and then they would hide in the apartment that was directly below it and just act like they didn't know what was going on. But you also have things that are from a story that I haven't talked about before on Black Box Online Radio, where there was a person who was of a Pacific Islander descent, and this becomes important later on, and he was not the murderer, he was the driver. He drove somebody to commit a murder, and then he becomes under investigation for the crime, so he flees Seattle and he goes to Saipan in the Pacific Islands. And then there's a whole process of extradition, and Cloyd Steiger actually flew first to Hawaii, then to Guam, and then to Saipan, and then they started the extradition process, and ultimately the guy was caught, and then he's just like, hey, wait a second. Yeah, I did it, but I was just the driver. I was a participant, but I wasn't the actual murderer. And what Cloyd Steiger said to him in the book Homicide: The View from Inside the Yellow Tape was, then what he says in Homicide: The View from Inside the Yellow Tape is that if you had just come forward immediately after the crime had happened, you would have been in a better situation than you are now. So many times, people go to jail for murder or another similar crime because of a split-second decision. Because the guy who fled from Seattle was just under the guise and belief at the time that it was just, there was no way out. He was under the threat of his life, thinking that this person's extremely dangerous. If I don't do what he says, then he might try and murder me. And the simple response was, well, you could have come forward to the authorities and then they could have done something for you. But the fact of the matter is, in a split-second decision, he got sent to jail for 25 years. And this happens all the time. If somebody is an active participant in a murder, they also get charged for murder as well. And the reason why is, once you become an accomplice, or once you insert yourself into a premeditated murder plan, then you become responsible for what happens. Like just the guy who drives the car, well, he helped facilitate the murder. Now, it might be a lesser charge. We got things like second-degree murder, manslaughter could even happen the way that the lawyers play it out. But this guy was ultimately sentenced to 25 years in prison for being the driver in that murder scene. And Lacey says, by chance, did you happen to check out the Jeffrey McDonald case yet? Not yet, Lacey, because I wanted to finish the book Homicide: The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, but that is on my list of proposed topics. I'm always paying attention to you guys. And much like Lacey, if you have any thing that you would like to put in the comment section down below, you can request things for future episodes. On True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, you can share anything you want about different subjects. And Jay is here. Hello, Jay. How's it going? But Jay had a message that was retracted. Now, as far as, oh, she says Jacob Levy was proposed by Martin Fido. Yes, but Pat Brown has endorsed that suspect, and she has also made her own variant of the theory, and that is that Jacob Levy committed the first 4 murders in the Jack the Ripper saga, but he did not commit the final crime, the murder of Mary Kelly. Pat Brown has definitely signed on to it. And Pat Brown also said that there are other people out there, like, what's the name of the book? Jacob the Ripper. And now, Jay, but by chance, do you remember the names of those people? Is it Tracy Ianson? Is that her name? Did she write the book Jacob the Ripper about Jacob Levy as a Jack the Ripper suspect? And the fact of the matter is, more than one person can have a suspect. And just because someone is the first person to talk about them. Now, Martin Fido was more famous for his other Jack the Ripper suspect, David Cohen, also known as Nathan Kaminsky. And to those of you who follow the Ripper episodes here on Black Box Online Radio, last Wednesday, I did an episode that I thought was the best one ever for Ripper Wednesday, and I know that's coming from some guy like me. I make the stuff, right? But in terms of the discussion, I was responding to the book Jack the Ripper: An Encyclopedia by John J. Edelston, and he had this section in the encyclopedia where he lists off certain Jack the Ripper suspects, and he ranks them on a scale of 0 to 5. 0 meaning absolutely not, 5 meaning highly likely or highly probable. And I have done something very similar in the Zodiac Killer mystery when I've ranked the suspects on a scale of 1 to 10. Although I should point out that there has never been a 10 out of 10 suspect in the Zodiac Killer mystery for me, because to say 10 out of 10 would mean that we've actually identified the killer, and that has not happened yet. Though maybe someday, I'm hoping that we will be able to put the 10 out of 10 thing and just say case closed for the Zodiac Killer. And what that should also be solved reasonably soon is DB Cooper. It should be. It should be. Will it happen? Probably not. It depends on what Eric Eulis is cooking up. But speaking of DB Cooper, my name is Ned DeHaan, and I'm the host of True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning. And I was recently a guest on the Cooper Vortex with Darren Schaefer. And I posted that in the Black Box Online Radio community page, as well as on the Facebook page for BPOWAR. But if you're curious about the DB Cooper mystery, I invite you to check out the Cooper Vortex. The interview that is done with me is called DB Cooper's Black Box with Ned DeHaan. And, really big thank you to Darren for having me on. And I would like to have Darren as a guest on this program as well, so I can talk about DB Cooper with him. Every Friday, I do an episode about DB Cooper called just that, Cooper Friday, and it will be coming out tomorrow. But it was a good experience talking to Darren, and, he has some very good questions. I noticed that he really likes to ask some of the same questions in different interviews, and that's amazing. It's perfect, because you get to hear different people's takes on the subject. And I should also point out that at the time of this recording, Black Box Online Radio has just hit the 4,000 subscriber mark. No applause necessary. Some channels celebrate 4 million. Some channels celebrate 400,000. Well, today we can celebrate 4,000. The Fox will approve. Thank you to each and every one of you for being a participant in these live streams, True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning, and also just tuning into any kind of Black Box Online Radio content over the years. I'm fully aware that this show is a work in progress, but, things are just going to be going up from here. No turning back now. And it really does mean a lot, because this show would not happen without you guys putting stuff in the live chat, putting things in the comments section, and just participating in the discussions, having these types of communal episodes. Black Box Online Radio wouldn't exist without that. And it's just upward and onward. And I have to give a shout out to longtime BBOWAR follower Classic Chevy Cat, who proposed that we should do a party for the 4,000 subscribers. Maybe on the next True Crime Talk Radio in the Morning, there can be something of that nature. And thanks again. So there's another story that I encountered in the book, Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape. And that relates to intercepting a murder for hire plot. I believe that that's chapter 7 in the book. And Cloyd Steiger was a homicide detective, and they had this instance where they intercepted a phone transmission, or it might have actually been done on the radio, like radio communication, where somebody was trying to hire a hitman, like a murder setup. But the problem was, though, the perpetrator was in Anne Arundel, Maryland at the time, Anne Arundel County, Maryland, and then he was supposed to fly to Seattle to commit the murder. And they had this whole thing set up about how they were going to bust him. An operation was put in place. They knew his name. They knew his flight. They knew what was going to happen. But then somebody in the department proposed, well, he hasn't actually committed the crime in Seattle yet. Why don't we just tell him to get on a plane and go back? And then that's actually in the book, Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, when somebody is saying that, let's just tell him to go back to Maryland. And Cloyd Steiger, the author of this book, is just writing this out saying, oh, are you kidding me? This guy is a contract killer. This guy is openly saying that he's going to commit murders. If he goes back to Maryland, he's probably just going to go commit another murder there, let alone that he's actually committed the crime. I mean, they have all the evidence to show that he committed the crime, and you're just saying, put him on a plane and go back. And the reason why I'm talking about this story with you now is sometimes people make decisions that don't quite make a lot of sense, or people in law enforcement are only human, and they are also going to be making mistakes. They're going to have errors in judgment. They're going to do things that are convenient for the time being that could have devastating consequences later on. And ultimately, they had a whole sting operation. They busted the guy, and he was arrested. This murder for hire plot was foiled, and he tried to say that, yeah, somebody asked me to help out with it, just like the Seattle Jungle Killer, just saying, yeah, I was a participant, but I wasn't the real main focus of this. And they're like, you flew from Maryland to Seattle just to help somebody commit a murder? That seems kind of weird. All complete lies. He was the real major hitman, but he was busted. And sometimes people make decisions that can have devastating consequences. And we have one here from Jeff Jones, who has dropped a super chat. Thank you so much, Jeff Jones. Much appreciated. And thank you to everybody else who has left super chats and super thanks and supported the channel at buymeacoffee.com/blackboxnid88. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And Robert H. says, do you still have the astrology channel, Ned? I haven't checked it in a while. Yes, Robert H. You're referring to AstroPsych 400. And AstroPsych 400 was something that I started in 2021. Yes, actually, to talk about astrology. And I still have it. And I go to it from time to time. Like, for example, I really wanted to focus on the psych part more so than the astro part. I didn't want to change the name or anything, but I did 3 episodes for a series called Persuasion Classics that came out in the earlier part of this year on AstroPsych, and they actually did fairly well for a channel that hadn't been touched in a very long time. And I've just gotten back to AstroPsych, putting out videos that are mostly going to focus on psychology. But I'm going to try and put out something a little bit more regularly. But my focus right now is mostly Black Box Online Radio, so I can talk to you guys in the morning about true crime. But, psychology is something that, if you guys can't tell, I'm curious about it. I read about it all the time. I watch videos about it. And I think one of the benefits about not being a psychologist myself is you can think in different ways, and you can think outside the box. And then you can look and explore different pathways, and sometimes something might make sense to you that even the professionals won't completely understand. So I think there's a lot of that in the in all types of academic disciplines. But in terms of this point from Homicide: The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, sometimes detectives and investigators make very bizarre judgments. Let's look at the preservation of evidence. Let's look at how people are handling things in the Zodiac Killer mystery, in the D.B. Cooper case, in Jack the Ripper. Now, one thing that Darren Schaefer shared in my interview with him on the Cooper Vortex is they even had a hair sample from D.B. Cooper. When he was on the plane, they put it on a slide, and it was preserved, right? It was lost. So, just these things about where on earth is the evidence ending up. With Jack the Ripper, this isn't the best example, but you might get a pass. It's been through 130 some odd years, 140 years. Don't ask me to do any math. Wait a second. Jack the Ripper operated in 1888. I was born in 1988. I'm 36. So is it 136 years? I just thought of that. Is this some way that I can remember this? 136 years since Jack the Ripper was committing these crimes? You might get a pass. London was bombed in World War II, let alone focusing on more contemporary cases. As much as everybody wants to see the Jack the Ripper mystery solved, they're going to have some more urgent matters in England, as well as throughout all of the United Kingdom, because their Jack the Ripper suspects are going to be connected to Scotland, Ireland as well. But in terms of the D.B. Cooper case, that happened in 1971. No excuse for losing the cigarettes that D.B. Cooper was smoking, the cigarette butts, losing this hair sample. And even the fact that they still have the tie that was allegedly worn by D.B. Cooper. He had a clip-on tie that he left on the plane. And Eric Eulis was trying to get that examined for his own, I guess you'd call it private DNA testing to see if it would match a particular D.B. Cooper suspect named Vince Peterson. I'm just like, bring it on. More power to him. I know you can't allow everybody to do that, but then that's just let's say hypothetically his suspect doesn't match. All right, well, you tried. I mean, they do this with the Zodiac killer suspects. From time to time, people actually get their DNA tested. But the problem is, though, with the Zodiac killer mystery, the evidence has also been extremely poorly preserved. And when I'm listening to the Citizen Detective podcast, which you guys can hear on YouTube for free, they talk about all of these stories where almost every episode it's like the evidence wasn't well preserved. The evidence wasn't well preserved. Poor police work. Well, like if they had been in a fist fight, there should have been blood evidence left behind at the crime scene based on the suspect's injuries. Nothing was claimed, nothing was reported, nothing was investigated, nothing was followed up. People make judgments in their decisions. And we have a comment from Don Spain. Firstly, Don Spain says, "Good morning, Ned and chat." Good morning to you too, Don. And Don Spain says that London was also bombed in World War I. Well, that's just more and more. Now, I have not exactly followed this exact thing up, but somebody said that a lot of Jack the Ripper evidence was lost because the building where it was preserved took a direct hit during the bombings in World War II. I haven't confirmed that, but that doesn't surprise me. And specifically, and do not quote me on this, but specifically it was the From Hell letter and the half kidney that Jack the Ripper mailed to George Lusk, who was the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Jack the Ripper's first or second most famous letter, depending on your outlook on life, I suppose. Time Theory is here. Hello, Time Theory. They should have known about the growing technology of DNA, even if they weren't using it yet. Yes! The concept was out there. Yes, Time Theory. In the Zodiac Killer mystery, in the D.B. Cooper case, they should have known that you should be preserving evidence for something, even if it's stuff like, well, I'm just going to handle this rope with my bare hands. I'm going to handle D.B. Cooper's glass with my bare hands. People should have known not to do that. Or the cigarette butts or something like that. Well, we can't get a fingerprint from it, so we're just going to not pay attention or not guard it too closely. They knew that scientific advancements were taking place. We know that scientific advancements are taking place. When I first started watching true crime programs back in 1995 or whenever it was, maybe even earlier than that, then we didn't have genetic genealogical DNA testing. Genetic genealogical DNA was not something in common parlance, but now it is. And now it is solving countless cold cases. Firstly, we know about the Golden State Killer. I don't even need to go through that story again. But all of the people who have been missing persons, unidentified individuals, John Does and Jane Does, are now being identified. Unidentified victims of serial killers are now being identified partially with genetic genealogical DNA, but there are even just other forms of DNA testing that has allowed us to bring light to the subject. A year and a half ago, I did an episode on the Fire Island Jane Doe, who was thought to have been the first confirmed victim of the Long Island serial killer, and the Fire Island Jane Doe has since been identified as Karen Vergata because of advancements in science, scientific breakthroughs. However, the suspect who is in jail right now, Rex Heuermann, has not yet been charged with her murder, as I understand. Instead, he was charged with the 1993 murder of Sandra Castillo, and that means that the Long Island serial killer was operating before Karen Vergata's murder in 1996, and as early as 1993, and maybe before. Yes, but Time Theory, I completely agree with you that they should have known about this. Now, the next reason why I wanted to talk to you about that chapter in the book, Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape, all about the questionable judgments is, one time, Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com asked me a question, and that is, does it bother you or concern you that former members of law enforcement are coming out with some types of bizarre theories in true crime cases, things that seem almost outlandish, or maybe they do indeed seem outlandish. And a prime example of this is John Cameron, the former investigator who has Edward Wayne Edwards as a Zodiac killer suspect and accuses Edward Wayne Edwards of committing 660 murders. And then even Steve Hodel is a former member of law enforcement himself, who just accuses his own father, George Hill Hodel, of either committing countless crimes or maybe having a possible connection with crimes going as far back as 1921. And Steve Hodell's claims about the Black Dahlia Avenger, maybe they have a little bit of truth to them, or he's coming at it from an honest place. I don't believe he's making anything up, and I don't even think that it's an unreasonable judgment to think that George Hill Hodel was the Black Dahlia Avenger. And right now, here on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, I would just like to ask you guys something. Do you want to hear more about the Black Dahlia Avenger connection to the Zodiac mystery on Zodiac Monday? And I've been, contacted by multiple people who have Zodiac Black Dahlia Avenger theories about how they think that the two killers are one and the same. The person who murdered Elizabeth Short back in the 1940s, January of 1947, and the Zodiac killer of the 1960s being one and the same. What I have noticed is members of my audience really do not want to hear anything about these far out theories or about these interconnected serial killer theories. Last Monday on Black Box Online Radio, I was talking to you guys about the Zodiac killer D.B. Cooper connection. The idea that the Zodiac and D.B. Cooper were one and the same. I know that 99% of you are just going to say, absolutely not. 99% of you don't want to hear about the Zodiac D.B. Cooper connection or the Zodiac Black Dahlia connection. You don't believe it. You don't think it's going anywhere. Some people even view these types of far out theories as distractions from the real truth. But, if somebody has put their name on a book and says, this is what I think happened, I do think it's worthy of investigation, because if you just think that it's not the truth, okay, well, then just say that it's not the truth and say the reasons why. But to answer that particular question about why do members of law enforcement make these bizarre types of judgments? Oh, firstly, we have CZ Guy here. Hello, CZ Guy. Thank you so much for the super chat. We have a super chat coming to us from CZ Guy. And CZ Guy has also become a regular supporter of Black Box Online Radio. And I can't thank you enough. And CZ Guy, maybe you noticed, Black Box Online Radio just hit the 4,000 subscriber mark. Couldn't do it without you guys. But my answer to that question, why are members of law enforcement making these weird judgments about their theories? There is a fascinating book out there called The United States of Paranoia by Jesse Walker. And it talks about how what people do is they arrange patterns of information in ways that they can understand. Humans are pattern-seeking individuals. This is the stuff that Jesse Walker likes to talk about all the time. So that what they do is they take information and they arrange it in a sequence so they can comprehend it. That's number one. Number two, I just read the book Still Missing by Ross Richardson. The full title is Still Missing: Rethinking the D.B. Cooper Case and Other Mysterious Disappearances, but Still Missing by Ross Richardson. And I was talking about him on Zodiac Monday, but I only shared half of the information. Number one is, what I said on Zodiac Monday was, some people are taking the bow and arrow and they're shooting it at the broadside of a barn, and then they paint the target around it. All right, that's one thing that Ross Richardson has said. The second is, the reason why they paint the target around the arrow is they have dopamine hits in the brain. They start thinking about that stuff from the United States of Paranoia. They arrange something in a pattern that makes sense to them, and they're like, oh my goodness, I figured it out. I know what's happening. I understand this. I know how this serial killer was thinking. I know how this murderer was thinking. I know how this criminal like D.B. Cooper was thinking. And then, if that doesn't fuel the reward system in their brain, talking about dopamine and endorphins, they put their findings out there on the internet, and some people say, wow, you're really smart. You got a good idea. And then they get picked up by the TV stations. Maybe they get featured in a news broadcast. Maybe they get on national attention. And it's almost just a compounding effect where people come up with something, they think they're on the right track, and it fuels these types of reward systems in the brain. Now, it's my understanding that everybody talks about dopamine hits. And the thing that actually makes you feel good is not the dopamine, it's the endorphins. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that acts as the precursor to the endorphins. But for, well, common discussions, I'll just call it the dopamine hits. And time theory says, are you convinced at this point that Arthur Lee Allen is not the Zodiac? Time theory. I wish this was my own response, but I think Tom Voigt said it the best. Nobody would be surprised if Arthur Lee Allen turned out to be the Zodiac. Nobody. Even me. In 2021, I included Arthur Lee Allen in my debunking series when I would talk about Zodiac killer suspects whom I thought were absolutely not the Zodiac or there was a very low chance. And the reasons why was just that I didn't really know why everybody was zoning in on Arthur Lee Allen to begin with. He didn't match the physical descriptions. It seems like he's too big. Well, he was balding. Arthur Lee Allen was also a sex offender, and I didn't see any evidence of sexual crimes in the Zodiac's creation and persona. Much of the story about Arthur Lee Allen comes to us from Don Chaney, who is a proven liar, or either, if you're not going to call him a liar, he has said untrue things. And I've gone through it many times on Black Box Online Radio. Drew Beeson has also explored this on his channel because Don Chaney is his Zodiac killer suspect. So there's a lot of evidence against Arthur Lee Allen, and that's why I included him in the debunking series. Would I be surprised if I woke up next morning and I saw the headline, oh yeah, there was some type of a breakthrough in the case and it was Arthur Lee Allen? No, because that just means that this narrative that has been established that I've been debating for so long was right, and I was wrong. I wouldn't be surprised at all because Arthur Lee Allen was publicly named. He had bombs in his house the way that the Zodiac killer talked about. He could have actually told somebody that he was trying to get a job as an enforcer, be like, hey, that Zodiac, that's me. I killed a taxi driver, took the piece of the bloody shirt, reasons for the Stein murder and all these weird things. And time theory says I've gone back and forth on it. Well, a lot of people examine the Arthur Lee Allen narrative, and I guess you can see that I will share something with you, time theory. When I did my suspect ratings episode, I gave Arthur Lee Allen a 5 out of 10. Now, that's not 0. Definitely not somebody like John J. Edelston who ranks on 0 to 5. That's a weird thing to use, 0 to 5. But I gave him a 5 out of 10. That's just 50-50. And meaning that I don't think that he is one of the highest ranking suspects because of all the reasons that I just listed. But he's not an absolute 0. Now, as far as this concept of dopamine working in the brain, back in 2018, 19, and 2020, I used to talk to you guys a lot about conspiracy theorists. Firstly, I don't knock conspiracy theorists. I am a conspiracy theorist. Somebody asked me that on another episode. What is your political affiliation? I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. I am a conspiracy theorist. But I was also fascinated about how and why conspiracy theorists think the way they do. And one thing that I encountered in one of the old black box recordings that I did was some people say that it heavily relates to dopamine production in the brain. And this is about how, I want to say it was a study from the University of Chicago that was talking about how people who have increased levels of dopamine production are more likely to believe conspiracy theories than people who don't. Same thing that Ross Richardson was talking about. The rewards, the good feeling when you can connect the dots, good feeling when you can put things together, good feelings when you can understand that all of these events that are happening can be united, and you're the one who figured it out. Now, not all conspiracy theories are true. And there's a book out there by Jonathan Kay called Among the Truthers, who talks about how people have a belief system. People believe things that are true, and then there are the actual factual events that are happening, and the conspiracy theory can act as a bridge between the worldview and the factual timelines. Now that sounds really good, right? Except that's almost downplaying conspiracy theories, because to the credit of Dr. Lee Meller from the Citizen Detective podcast, he pointed out that sometimes a lot of conspiracy theories are true. That's why I'm a conspiracy theorist. And if you're going to expose some type of theory in the Zodiac Killer mystery, or Jack the Ripper, or D.B. Cooper, especially D.B. Cooper, I'm not going to be surprised at all. No, like it turns out, oh yeah, some member of law enforcement was covering up for an individual in the Zodiac Killer mystery. I wouldn't be surprised they botched the investigation on purpose. That would make sense. And Charlie is back here. Hello, Charlie. Hey, how's it going? And Jeff Jones says Arthur Lee Allen or Don Chaney is the closest match. And the closest match, well, like that's the stuff for Drew Beeson to explore on the Zodcast, and he has found a lot of reasons about how and why he thinks that Don Chaney was the Zodiac Killer, and he's the person who strung this all together, and that Arthur Lee Allen was either used as an active participant or the perfect patsy. But Arthur Lee Allen and Don Chaney have both had their DNA tested, and they both either did not have positive matches or they had negative matches, something to that effect. So, does that give anybody cause for concerns? I ultimately think that they aren't 100% sure if they've located the Zodiac Killer's DNA. They aren't 100% sure if they have located D.B. Cooper's DNA, and even DNA in the Jack the Ripper case. Because I want to do a larger episode about this for Ripper Wednesday to explore the possibility of, could Jack the Ripper's DNA be retrieved? Maybe, according to somebody like Russell Edward, author of the book Naming Jack the Ripper, that's possible. Well, let's find out. That's the whole point. We're going to investigate it. And Charlie says, I'm a dopamine fiend. Glad to be here. I am too. I am a dopamine-centered personality. This is the stuff that I talked about in the guide True Crime Teaches Us to Conquer Toxic People, where we have the big 5 personality traits, right? Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. But what I like to do is to partner that with the 4 governing components of brain chemistry: dopamine, testosterone, estrogen, and serotonin. People who are dopamine-centered do things to fuel their own excitement. Most of the serial killers out there are most likely dopamine-centered. And it doesn't mean like your brain only has dopamine in it, you have no serotonin. No. You are making decisions because of the dopamine receptors in your brain. So, you know what, Charlie? You got a cheers for that. I'm also a dopamine fiend. Now, I was watching a different channel out there that I talk about on AstroPsych, and it's run by Owen Cook. He's a motivational speaker. And what he said was, we should have an app on our phones that just puts dopamine into the brain. Okay, he didn't say we should have that. He said that will probably be the next thing, where you just push a button, maybe you look at some colors and lights, and the more you look at the colors and lights, the more dopamine goes into the brain. And I began to think, at first I was like, that's crazy. No one would ever fall for that. And then I was like, you know what? I wish somebody would do that. I wish I could do that if I could actually put those steps in a process to make an app. I don't know how to go about that. I mean, I like to talk to you guys about true crime in the morning. That's what I'm more about. But I would love an app like that. And I told somebody about this idea, and they said, that doesn't sound like anything that we don't already have. We have Instagram. That's what Instagram is. And I'm like, no. With Instagram, at the very least, you're still creating a photo or a meme, or maybe you've stolen an image from Google and you're posting that. I'm talking about just colors and just light. And Charlie says, that would be wonderful. Get dopamine easily. Sure. And we have a comment from Don Spain who says, I'm a conspiracy analyst. Absolutely, Don. Bring it on. Conspiracy analyst. Sort through the facts. Investigate. The fox has not been doing his job with hydration. Munda says, I need dope. Do you need dope, L-Dopa, dopamine, or just straight up dope? Now, Don Spain, conspiracy analyst, In the second episode of Black Box Online Radio that I ever did, I talked about that exact thing, about how conspiracy theorists are given a bad reputation. But I was like, no, wait a second. Why are conspiracy theorists giving a bad reputation? Or sometimes people use the term conspiracy nut. That shouldn't even exist in our vocabularies. And why don't we begin to look at exploring conspiracy theorists from the point of view as independent investigators? So you use the term conspiracy analyst. That's what I wanted to call myself, an independent investigator. And I didn't know that this channel was going to go in the true crime direction exclusively. I thought it would be like true crime, conspiracy theories, maybe political misconceptions, but political misconceptions, even if you, but I had really toyed with the idea of writing a book about conspiracy theories called just that, Independent Investigators. Tyler Scott is here. Hi, Tyler. If they have the Zodiac's DNA, I don't understand why they haven't run it through the Ancestor database. You know, that really is a big point, Tyler. You would think if they had the Zodiac's DNA to the level which they claim they have it, there would be some way to do that. That just leads me to believe that they aren't completely certain that that's the Zodiac DNA. And what it sounds like is there are these little fragments of DNA that are found on different places on the Zodiac killer's envelopes. Probably nothing from the crime scene. Wouldn't it be amazing if they had touch DNA from the shell casings at Lake Herman Road? Wouldn't it be amazing if they had a palm print or something from the Zodiac after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and they also had a palm print from the same person after the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and they had DNA from two different places that they could match together, and they would say, yeah, that's the killer's DNA. I don't believe that they have that type of evidence. And this is what I was talking about with the book, Homicide, The View from Inside the Yellow Tape. Not all cases are that complicated. Not all cases are that ridiculous. Not all cases are that far out and wacky. With a lot of the cases, the perpetrator is a little bit dumb. They make very costly mistakes. They're very simple. There's a very clear path of evidence to the perpetrator. There is sometimes an instance like the Seattle Jungle Killer where he's just indirectly confessing to it, and he's face to face with detectives while he's doing it. Sometimes it's a lot easier. So with the Zodiac Killer, like, what's the difference between him and these other stories? Was he really smart? Fairly smart. IQ of maybe 105 to 135, maybe. I'm just guessing. It's not like I can tell you 100%. And then, was he very careful? Reasonably careful. Reasonably careful. But did he just have a lot of dumb luck on his sides? Yes. Smart, careful, dumb luck. Unsolved mystery. Can we just start, like, banging the drum? That's what happens. Smart, careful, and dumb luck. And the case goes unsolved. With Jack the Ripper, it's even worse, because I'm not completely convinced that the Ripper was smart. And we have one here from Jeff Jones says, I got to have that dope too. Moon dust. Moon dust, you got to spread the stuff around. Maybe with the 4,000 subscriber party, Moon dust can bring the treats up to the moon and back. Time Theory is here, and he says, do you think there is still evidence in the Zodiac case that only law enforcement has that they are measuring things against, or is pretty much everything out there? To answer the first part of the question, yes, double yes, triple yes. I believe that law enforcement is holding back on so much. Some of the reasons why. When we saw the Long Island serial killer suspect Rex Heuermann get arrested, he wasn't mentioned in any of the discussions. And the whole time, law enforcement has the killer's DNA from multiple crime scenes, and they're just narrowing in on the suspect. They're zeroing in on this suspect. And there is just a lot that they withheld from the public. Law enforcement also has privileged information that they withhold from the public. And the case that I always go back to is the DC sniper story. And I've said this before, so I'll be very brief. about how they put out all of these false stories that there were these two people that were serial snipers in the DC area. And even in my part of West Virginia, they told us to be on the lookout for a white van with a roof rack. That's the killer's vehicle. And it turned out they were driving a blue Chevrolet Caprice. Not a van at all. They put out misleading info to the public. They withhold all types of information. I think the Zodiac Killer mystery is no exception. And they probably know a lot more, and they have a lot more evidence that they can test things against. I don't think they're going to be very public about it, though. Ned, who do you think the Zodiac was? Well, it's really quite simple, Moondust. Oh, no, it isn't. No, it isn't. I don't know. Not at all. The more I learn about the Zodiac Killer mystery, the less I know. And extremely frustrating. Captain Jenks is here. Hello, Captain Jenks. Was Felix Rodriguez ever a suspect in the D.B. Cooper case? I'm not familiar with Felix Rodriguez. Do you have any more information to share about him, Captain Jenks? I'm not sure who that is, but I would like to read more. And somebody did post some things recently, and I know where their page is, but they had a Latino suspect in the D.B. Cooper case. And we are approaching the 1 hour mark here on True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. Thank you to everybody who has been participating. And I would just like to say that as this episode winds down, you can put anything you want in the comments section. You can share anything you want about any final questions. And True Crime, Captain Jenks says his name was AKA Max Gomez. No, I'm going to have to look more into this person. And but I would be doing a couple of new episodes have already been planned for Cooper Friday. And as this episode winds down, I would like to say one more time, every Monday I do an episode about the Zodiac Killer called Zodiac Monday. Every Wednesday I do an episode about Jack the Ripper called Ripper Wednesday. And every Friday I do one about D.B. Cooper called Cooper Friday. Now, thank you so much to all of the YouTube watchers and listeners, but Black Box Online Radio is now available on Spotify. You can find it under the name Black Box True Crime, and in the image that has been provided there, it says Black Box Podcast, but you can search Black Box True Crime on Spotify. And other than that, I will be seeing you guys over on Zodiac Monday. I hope everyone has a good weekend. Now, I'm toying with a few things for Astro Psych 400 this weekend. There might be another bonus episode out there, but I'm going to share something with you right now. Next week on Black Box Online Radio, in about 8 or 9 days from now, I will be releasing a bonus episode on the Yuba County 5. I've mentioned Drew Beeson a few times in this episode. He has a book out there called Out of Bounds about the disappearance of the Yuba County 5. And there's another book out by Tony Wright, which explores this mysterious disappearance and a very, very bizarre and intricate mystery. And I'll be doing a bonus episode on the weekend. And we have Time Theory saying, thanks, Ned. Hey, thanks to you too. And Don Spain says, thanks, Ned, and congratulations. Hey, 4,000 subscribers. I had really no idea how and why this channel would go in the direction that it went, and would it even get 4 subscribers? You guys gotta understand. I started making YouTube videos in 2010, and things were just different back then. You would just put a video online, and you would wake up the next morning and you'd get 100 views, sometimes 200. And when I made Black Box Online Radio in 2017, I didn't put anything on YouTube for 6 years. In 2017, I made my first episodes of Black Box Online Radio and got 0 views. Not just like 1 or 2 people. There would be 1 view and it was me. Nobody was listening. I'm like, well, I'll try again. I'll talk about some different subjects. But I just kept at it. And I remember when I got the first comment coming, it's like, you want to talk about dopamine hits? That's not a dopamine hit. That was a life-changing experience when somebody actually left a comment on Black Box Online Radio. So this is one of the reasons why I celebrate all of these milestones, whether it was 400 subscribers, 500, 4,000, up to the moon and back. That's what we're thinking. And I'm going to be chilling with Moondust at the celebration party. All right, so thank you so much to everybody who's listened to this episode. And one more time, you can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan. Black Box Online Radio on Facebook, BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram, Black Box Online Radio on TikTok. Yes, we have TikTok. I don't really interact with anything on TikTok. I just post my reels and shorts over there because I'm mostly on Instagram and Facebook, and the email address blackbox19radio@aol.com. That will be all for me now. See you on Zodiac Monday. Until next time.